5 fantasy films that fantasy role players should view. Interesting question. And I'm sure this will get progressively harder the more people that reply to it. But not using any of the films that I have seen from the other replies, although there could be an unknowing duplication, my list hopefully is a little interesting. I've always been picky about fantasy films. There are very few that I've enjoyed all the way through, mostly because I've preferred my imagination or the shared imagination of the group to the visual effects that have been available really up until this point in film history. So a lot of the suggestions that I'm making are films that I may not actually like watching, but I think have something valuable to offer to someone who's just starting out running or playing in a fantasy campaign. So starting from worst to least bad, starting with number 5, which would be this film, Red Sonja. Hopefully you're all laughing like I am. It has a lot going against it, this film, but it is beloved by many. Why would I suggest it? Mainly, it's the landscapes. As they travel around from place to place, the landscape is full of lost, forgotten, or broken relics from earlier ages, which the characters treat as scenery. And it's that that I find really compelling about pretty much any really well-established fantasy setting, is that there is much that has come before that we never get to see, and could be explored, and might be the basis of whatever dungeon crawl or quest that you find yourself on. The quest structure of this film is, simple, but it does communicate that point to someone who's never approached the game before. So, number 5, Red Sonja. Number 4 is a film I only saw recently, living over here on the far side of the earth. But I like it, and it's Black Death. Now, for a fantasy list, this doesn't entirely count as fantasy, but the overall brutality and fear in a world where, to the people living in it, magic is definitely real and something to be feared, or something that's threatening. I think the insight this gives into that kind of world is valuable. Not to mention the class and gender clashes of a society where might is still making right, and the ongoing war between conscience and conviction are also valuable as a way to keep a fantasy world from being fantasy for the sake of fantasy. Let's go here, loot this dungeon, cash in, get another level. That kind of limited gameplay needs somewhere to go, and this is an idea. Also, it highlights the party structure and cohesion of an adventuring party, and seeing that in film, and the camaraderie that can develop, and the individualism of the characters. It's very useful. So, Black Death. Yet another movie where Sean Bean dies before the end. Number 3, not a fantasy film in the swords and sorcery kind of way, but Circle of Iron. Okay, Circle of Iron, starring David Carradine, and should have had Bruce Lee in it, but that's another story. Why would I suggest this, classic martial arts film? Circle of Iron is really a mystical quest. It's one person's journey of self-enlightenment, but it's more than that. It shows a world in the background where quests like this go on, where people strive to become worthy of greater ideals, and where there are alternate levels of reality at work. all the time. What some of the characters see isn't exactly what's going on from the perspective of some of the other characters. And the interference of one level of reality with another level of reality is an interesting concept for a fantasy game where you might have pantheons of deities. Okay. The other key point is that in Circle of Iron, the combat is not there for pure action or entertainment or distraction. The combat is there as content, and the characters are learning as much about their world and themselves in periods of combat as they are in periods of exploration. It's a helpful suggestion to get combat to a different level where it can have something to contribute beyond just dice rolling and laughing. So, Circle of Iron. Number 2 already. Wow. Ladyhawke. Another one which may cause some chuckling, particularly because of the Tangerine Dream soundtrack. If you can endure the soundtrack, and I can't always, and even when this movie was new, I had trouble with the soundtrack. I also had trouble with all the chrome. So there's a lot about this movie not to like from a gritty fantasy point of view. But if you can survive the soundtrack and the chrome, this story has a story arc of jealousy and a hellfired curse, coupled with the quest to break that curse, which are classic and powerful, penetrating even all the crap. Tied in with this are supplementary story arcs of betrayal and redemption, coming of age, the growth, the enduring power of love and trust. It's all hardcore, classic fantasy. The curse can only be broken in a certain place at a certain time. They have to get there. They have to assemble the tools of knowledge. They have to build the group. This is excellent instruction on how to frame a story with a clear beginning and a hoped-for conclusion, with disparate characters, with different levels of ability, different skill sets, different interests, bringing them all together on this one quest and having their story arcs, these multiple story arcs, travel in a complementary but not identical journey. Plus, Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer. So, Ladyhawke. Number 2. Number 1 is something that maybe no one around has seen, or maybe you have. This film is a Korean film, and it's called Musa, okay, which basically means warrior. And it's a slightly subversive anti-Confucian film dressed up as a truly brutal slog through the desert, through the wastelands. There are chases and escapes, there's brutality, there's class struggles. It's some of the most incredible melee combat I have seen filmed. It's an incredibly brutal world, and an unlikely band of warriors is traveling from place to place. They go through periods of triumph, well-equipped to no equipment. The idea is who will survive. And it's very telling who among the band of heroes actually does survive at the end. I can't recommend the combat highly enough in this film, particularly for unusual weapons. There are other Asian films which are far more fantasy than this. This is definitely grounded in the historical fiction world. However, for the combat alone, I'd recommend it. But the story, again, this quest to recover the lovely Zhang Ziyi, is definitely worth it for any fantasy building viewing purposes. The subtitles of this film, depending on which version you get, can be incredibly bad, which only adds to the fun. But you may have to watch certain scenes once or twice to understand the motivation of the characters. But if you haven't seen it and you want to communicate the ferocity and the clash of weapon styles and between different cultures, this is definitely the film to watch. I hope this was interesting and helpful. Thanks for the initial post. It gave me something to do on a Sunday morning.